10-12 Big 12 special team show. We are here to recap week 4 in the Big 12. Now, not as many big game-changing special teams plays this week to review. We do have a few from Kansas State and Texas just to look at, but that presented us with a perfect opportunity to kind of do a little more in-depth looking at a few things, specifically one special teams unit in the Big 12, and then some of the best punters and argue who is the best punter in the Big 12. So I'm very excited to have from PFF joining us today, Dalton Wasserman. Thanks, Dalton. Appreciate you being here.
Anytime. I appreciate it big time, man. I think it's rare to see somebody like yourself who appreciates the third phase so much to talk about it like this. And it makes a difference in games, and teams who are better on special teams are better all around for it. So you've got a significant part of the game that sometimes gets forgotten about, and it's good to bring some awareness to it and talk about it, because there's a lot of granular detail that goes into it, and you really get to see the ins and outs of the game from that side.
It is an important part of the game. Like when we're in the Big 12 here, we have Kansas State, Kansas State, Virginia Tech. I think when you think special teams in college football, those are the two teams that have produced the best and most well known. And so it made a lot of sense. And you know what? I'm a big fan of offensive lines. I think the most underappreciated unit on the field. Second place is just special teams in general, right? You either want to talk about them because they did something great or ignore them the rest of the time. And I feel like we should be able to talk about the good and the bad and the rest of the time and the impact that they make. So I want to kick off today's show. Oklahoma State fans down bad, 2-2 on the season, definitely not going the way they would like. But there is a big positive for Oklahoma State fans as of right now. Oklahoma State is a program that used to pride itself on really good special teams. It took a dip for a while, and now they're back up, at least according to PFF's premium stats. They are currently number 3 in the country. The ranking or the scoring they have is a 90.5. Miami of Ohio and Iowa are tied at first at 90.9. Oklahoma State's actually tied with Army for third at 90.5. And so I'm glad you're here, because I need some help understanding exactly how this grading is decided and what is helping to determine that Oklahoma State is one of the 4 best special teams units in the country.
There's 2 things that stick out to me. One, the grading, I'll admit, is a little tilted because they did block 3 kicks in week 1. That was against, it was a lower competition team. It was against Central Arkansas. They blocked 3 field goals and extra points in week 1. And anytime you block a kick or a punt, that gets heavily weighed in. Those are big time plays, game changing plays on special teams. So that does make a difference, despite the more mediocre kicking and punting grades that they have. The one thing that consistently sticks out to me is they cover kicks and punts excellent. They're right now one of only 8 teams who has not missed a tackle in kick or punt coverage. And I was looking at it before this week was finalized, but I believe they've played the most kick and punt snaps without missing a tackle in the country. So they stay in their lanes. They're incredibly disciplined in coverage. Again, the grading got a good base the first week when they blocked 3 kicks. But you look at the last I saw on kickoff, I believe they had the 11th best average field position coming off of kickoffs in the country. So when you're making tackles, you're staying in your lanes, you're staying disciplined, giving your team good field position. Yeah, we grade tackling the same way on special teams as we do good tackles on defense. It's a very similar manner. And to not miss any tackles on special teams through 4 games in, I believe it's 45 snaps, that's good stuff. So that's really, I would say that's the heaviest part of it on a week-to-week basis, is that their coverage units are really, really consistent, really disciplined, really solid tacklers.
I mean, that's good to hear. Obviously, like I said, Oklahoma State fans down bad a bit with the way the season is going, but it is good to know that at least on special teams, things are going well. And there's so much. I think that's what part of the difficulty of trying to understand what makes the special team successful is, like you see the kicking and you see the kick returns, but it's hard to figure out like successful punt coverage and kick coverage. And okay, well, they didn't get very far, so that means they're good. But like, it's harder to watch than to say, hey, how'd the running back do today? Like, did the wide receiver catch the passes? Did he get some yards after catch? And so some of that stuff, it's even watching it, it's hard to grade. So it is really interesting to see how well Oklahoma State is doing and why they have been so successful so far. I do want to get into a debate, and I told you about two of these guys, and then I forgot about a third, and so we're going to have to kind of do some of this on the fly. I'm curious who the best punter in the Big 12 is, and I know that's not a debate we all care about, but there will be a punter marked on the first team All Big 12 team at the end of the year. And turns out, arguably three of the best, or the four best punters right now in the Big 12, in my mind, nationally, are in the Big 12. They reside at Texas Tech with Austin McNamara. They reside at BYU in Ryan Rehkow, and they reside at Iowa State at Tyler Perkins, in Tyler Perkins. And so I want to kind of go over these guys with you. Each one has some things about him that are incredibly impressive, some of the top stats in the country. I'm gonna pull this graphic up that I made, and hopefully it'll work properly while we talk. I'm curious from PFF's grading while I pull this up, because I'm still learning how to work some of this stuff. Where do you guys have each of these three guys ranked nationally as far as punters go?
So McNamara, we'll start with him. I'm just looking at the top here with an 82.3 punting grade. Is actually fourth best in the nation right now. He's an elite punter. He's laid 6 punts inside the 20, but he's got a terrific net, 43.3, which I'm seeing is in the top 20 in the country. Rehkow is right behind him at 8th with a 79.8 grade, and we'll dig into it more as we debate the three of them. Perkins is lower down in the grading, and there's some reasons for it. Just a 62.5, which hard to believe, but is just barely inside the top 100. It's a funky thing because you see Perkins net, he's leading actually the entire country. I have in my stats with 14 punts inside the 20. He's got a terrific 48.4 yard average. But the grading is a product not just of distance and traditional stats, but there's the three big things that go into our punt grading. We take into account equally distance and hang time and location, So I think the ideal, I've kind of learned doing this is my third year grading now, that the ideal punt actually goes 60 yards and a yard from the sideline with, if a punter could get 5 seconds of hang time on every punt. You really want punts to not be able to be returned, if that makes sense. If you get a great punt off and eliminate the threat of a return the best you can with a combination of those three things, that's really the ideal punt. So when you talk about Perkins being graded lower, and he's got a huge leg, might have, from what I've seen so far, the strongest leg in the country. Just ridiculous. I think is as long as 70 this year. It is. Yeah. And a 48.4 average is nasty. It's 6th best in the country. And McNamara is right in front of him at 5th best with 48.6. Perkins has a booming leg. The one thing I do see is there's not as much control as those other two guys. If I was backed up on my own 15 and I just needed somebody to boot it down the other side and just flip the field, I would probably take Perkins of the three of them. Reminds me a little of Matt Ariza from San Diego State last year. Just a ridiculous leg. Could punt the ball 80 yards if he wanted to. When you get Perkins a little more in that midfield kind of spot where he's got to place the ball in a corner, let's say he's kicking from plus territory or from midfield, somewhere in there, a little more struggle because I believe he's put more kicks into the end zone than the other two. And those actually get downgraded because you're kind of giving away yardage as compared to what is ideal. But he's got a huge leg and a ton of ability, and I wouldn't be shocked if on leg strength alone he got an NFL shot. But the other two definitely also very good legs. Rehkow especially probably more of like an A- leg than an A+, but excellent. Both of them excellent at placing the ball closer to the sideline. Both of them with significantly better hang time than Perkins. And again, to be in a country where obviously, every team's got a punter, and these two guys, McNamara's 4th and Rehkow's 8th in grading, they really do all three of those things well when you talk about a combination of distance, location, especially with proximity to the sideline or in front of the goal line, and hang time. Perkins kicks kind of those far low liners that sometimes do get returned. I saw a couple of punts where the ball's caught and his gunners have 10 yards of space still to cover from the returner, which is not necessarily what you want. You don't want a punt returner who's often the other team's best athlete on the whole team with 10 yards of space to work with. So the technique is a little better with the other two, and Perkins has the strongest leg. But sometimes even with punters, it's a matter of preference, and these three are very, very close in talent.
Yeah, you mentioned, look, first off, for Iowa State, as bad as special teams have been for Iowa State during the Matt Campbell era, to have somebody as good as Tyler Perkins is a positive. You mentioned touchbacks. He does leave the Big 12. I think Big 12 numbers are still a little bit behind. It says 5, but it's a little bit behind. I think they're 1 shy on the inside 20s and 1 shy on 50 plus. So
the 5 on touchbacks is correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Next closest is McNamara with 2. Lane Wilkins of Houston also has 2. Nobody else has close to 5. But so you're getting the leg, you're getting the strength. You've got a 70-yard punt is just ridiculous. Now I will note we're going to talk about Kansas State punt that was 1 yard shy. 70 currently leads the Big 12. There's 1 yard shy from Kansas State. We'll show that here coming up real quick. So in your mind right now, if we were going to fill out our ballot for Big 12, all Big 12 team this year, who would you have as your number 1 punter?
That's a tight one. I probably, based on where we lean with the grading, would stay away from Perkins. I know the traditional thought with the average and the distance and the sheer flash of it, it might be Perkins, but very, very tight between McNamara and Rehkow. Reckow's got a little more. He's got a little bit more proof with 6 more punts than McNamara. The net is a little in advantage of McNamara. The yards per attempt are almost identical. It's very, very, very close. I'd probably just on the grading and just some of the metrics just slightly lean towards McNamara, but it's so close. I mean, the numbers are so close that they could change like this coming week. So it's going to be a fun battle to watch all the way through, because those two, I mean, both of them have, from what I've seen, especially I watched a lot of Rehkow this week, both have a very innate ability to just place the ball where they want it to. I think special teams coordinators really appreciate that. I think one thing that does get forgotten in special teams is that schematics are huge, right? You think about, some people think special teams is all just every team does the same thing and it's all effort. No. And I think even when you talk about the punters, look, these coordinators are in these punters' ears when they're punting from midfield or the plus 45 or a spot where you're really trying to pin a team back, or which direction we're punting it, where we're trying to put it, what type of punt we're using. To have either of these guys is a huge advantage for a special teams coach. So it's very tight based on the numbers I have here. I would probably lean just ever so slightly to McNamara, but it's so tight. Like this could flip this week. That's how close these two are.
I mean, I'm just keeping track of average yards per punt for the last couple of weeks as I came up with the idea to talk about this. Like, it's been just shift and move and shift and move and shift, and it's Perkins, and then it's Rehkow, and then it's McNamara, and then so it's going to be an interesting race between these three throughout the year. I think these three are kind of the leaders in the clubhouse at this point. I think there are a lot of good special teams players in the Big 12, but I feel like these three, as far as punting goes, are leaders right now, and we're just going to see kind of who ends up at the end of the year with the most impressive stats. It's again, like, I think punting's interesting because it can change. Like, I think fans do get excited and you're like, oh my God, it was a booming kick and he planted it right inside the 5 and he didn't outkick his coverage. So the defenders were right there in the catcher's face at the 5-yard line. He's got no option and nowhere to go. And you're just like, okay, that's awesome. We've just flipped the field. And so I think like we appreciate it in the moment, but don't appreciate enough, like, these guys have such a big impact and can have such a big impact on a game. Now, obviously the defense has to stop the opposing offense from marching 95 yards down the field, but like putting your defense in that spot, like, is such a big thing that I think punters play. I mean, especially nowadays, it's just a massive role in college football.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think, honestly, having a guy like Perkins for a team like Iowa State, who a lot of weeks struggles to score, right? If you have a lot of 3 and outs, especially at your own 20, your own 25, coming off touchbacks or whatever, flipping the field, a guy like Perkins might be better for a school like Iowa State, a team that's struggling offensively, a team that has to fight for field position. You would much rather, if you're playing in a defensive game, you would much rather make the other team go 90 yards if you can than 65. It's a big advantage. If you've got a punt, if you've got a bad offense and a punter with a weak leg and you're always backed up and you're fighting, your defense is fighting from the 35, 40 constantly, that's a different animal. So I think a guy like Perkins fits what Iowa State, I don't want to say their weaknesses, but kind of. They've struggled to score for the last year and a half. So you have a guy like that, and you can coach a little bit differently. You can coach to your defense. You can coach the field position. You can, you don't feel like in certain in between spots that you have to go for it on 4th and 3, where you just go, you know what, pin them back, flip the field, and we'll just go the other way and we'll play defense and see what we can do from there.
Right. To say that you have a punter that balances out some of the weaknesses of the team, like it's not a great offense. They can't run the ball. Like, I'm glad they put up points last week, but they're still going to struggle. And to have somebody who can flip the field in that way is huge. So let's go ahead and look at some of our highlights from last week's games. I've got 2 from the Kansas State win over UCF, and then 2 from Texas Baylor. Again, none of these had an impact on the outcome of these games, but they're just ones I want to look at. I'm always interested in missed field goals, and I don't mean that to make to come down hard on any kicker, but you get ones that are interesting to me. And I want to start with Chris Tennant's field goal attempt by Kansas State. Closing seconds of the first half. It's just a 26-yarder and it misses. And so I'm curious as we watch this clip, what you see that kind of explains like what happened here for him, because this is what in our mind is like a chip shot, right? It's a 26-yard field goal. Guys hit a 51-yarder before. We've had enough kickers on thus far to talk about it's not distances and everything. But what do you see here from this clip that kind of says, oops? Like, it doesn't list as blocked, but man, it's kind of hard not to think it wasn't.
I actually don't think it was. From what I saw, I watched actually all of his kicks in this game, and he missed an extra point the same way later in this game too, hooked it. And I think I could be wrong, because even on all 22, it's very small, especially kicker strokes are very, very hard to see if you're not in person. It kind of looked like his front foot on this kick compared to the other ones was a tiny bit further back, and and obviously he came around it. If your front foot's a little further back, you got to reach a little more out in front of you, and if you get around the ball, it starts to hook like that. And the funny part with Tennant is 5 of his 6 misses last year were pushed to the right instead of hooked. So all of a sudden you see, I don't know if it's an over adjustment from the right hash. Last year he missed a couple from the right hash that he just hit 2 straight. But either his plant foot was a little behind where it needed to be, because you look at his other kicks and it looked a little more firm with his heel kind of even with the football, and he didn't come around it, or he's just over adjusting on the right hash after missing a handful last year from that same spot to the right. Again, he missed 6 kicks last year, and he only hooked 1 of them. 5 of them were wide to the right.
Want to talk about, we mentioned a big punt. This was Kansas State's game. Kansas State's only punt of the entire game by Jack Blumer. Came in the second quarter, 4 minutes left. Kansas State only punted 1 time in this entire game, which is crazy. This is a 69-yarder. We mentioned 1 yard shy of the current leader in the clubhouse for the Big 12 record for the year so far. But I mean, we talk about booming kicks. We talk about flipping the field and things you want to see. Backed up almost to their own end zone, 5 yards shy. And he just, smokes this ball. That is a fantastic. And you talk about placement by the sideline, right? You want to be right there. You don't want to kick that is easy to return. Trying to find these clips again. From where it looks like it lands, it looks like it does what you want. It moves deep and it goes over by the sideline. That's an incredible punt. I'm going to give him tons and tons of props here for hitting one that deep that goes where you want it, right?
Absolutely. This was, and it's funny because watching the rest of his punts, this was by far his best of the season. That ball, I had that ball landing at 58 yards, and then it rolled forward, and then they officially spotted at the return there for the 69. So it landed at 58, I got 4.46 a hang time on it and only about 4 yards ish from the sideline. It is a terrific punt. It's his best punt of the year. I'm not sure he had a punt last year as good as this one. It's far and away his best punt of the year. And you get a punt. This is exactly what you're talking about, though. When you talk about pinning it on the sideline and make a return harder, the only reason that ball was picked up was just so the returner there could save face for that ball could have kept rolling to break the long for the season inside the 10-yard line. He stopped that ball at the 13 or 14 just so it wouldn't keep going. And that's not even your designated returner back there. So he's just trying to save something out of this. This is as good as it gets. Absolutely. Solid hang time, almost 4 yards. That right there is, what we were talking about, the near perfect punt earlier. If every punt could be like this, 58 yards on the fly and 4 yards from the sideline, I mean, that's as a punter, you start doing that consistently, you'll be in the NFL for a long time.
Help me understand why is it so much harder to return a ball when the punt lands close to the sideline like that?
You only have a one-way go. Punt returners, athletes, guys who like to play in space, they like having a two-way go. They can shake either way, or they could get straight up field, right? Having a one-way go. The other thing with directional punting is that you can, the special teams coordinator can scheme up things for the gunners, especially when you talk about pinning them in a corner in the same way for kickoffs that some teams use that pooch kick kind of into the corner, like outside the numbers. Same thing for punting. When you give even, a good athlete's a good athlete back there, but if he only has a one-way go, where he's going, you kind of use in the same way, even they talk about corners, use the sideline to squeeze him. So if he wants to run to the open field where it's way too wide, and as long as you keep contained, you're good. You can allow him to get east and west, and your help will get there. Or if you just squeeze him to the sideline, unless you really blow it down the sideline with something, it's going to minimize the return going down the sideline. Sometimes you see guys who just they kind of concede and they take the ball 5-6 yards and they just walk out of bounds because there's just nowhere else to go. When you give a good athlete a two-way go back there in the middle of the field, Perkins has this issue sometimes with his, where lower hang time, middle of the field, and again, I've seen a couple of punts where his gunners were 9-10 yards from the returner still when he caught the ball. You don't want really good athletes. Really, I should say a three-way go. He could burst straight ahead, or he could take it either way, left and right. It's a dangerous game. It's a really dangerous game you're playing, especially when your punt returner very often is the best athlete on your team.
We've got two plays from Texas Baylor. And obviously, this neither had a big impact or any impact on the outcome of this game. Texas won this game handily. But it is interesting to me. And it's strange to see something like this happen twice by two different players, to see two guys fumble the catch off of a punt. And then what I want to ask you is, watching these plays, and we'll do hold on, which one I have first? Okay, so we have the first one is in the second quarter. This one is a fumble by Xavier Worthy on a punt. Like, I'm curious if there's anything we can take away here that's not just, well, he just fumbled it. Like, Texas made two special teams gaffes and it happens, and that's what happens. And that's, there's nothing you can emulate. I'm going to pull up the other one here as well. Now watch it. This one, of course, was by Jordan Whittington. It came in the third quarter of the game. Another opportunity for Baylor that they were able to recover, but then didn't really get to do much with as far as scoring goes. Do you see is this something to do with the way the ball was punted? Is this to do with just two guys who didn't get the ball and fumbled it? Or is this something that Baylor has done that could be repeated against Texas again later in the season?
From Baylor's point of view, it didn't look anything out of the ordinary. I think, usually if you get one muff in a game, you kind of chalk it up to like a mental error, a lack of focus, or just maybe just the ball was knuckling on you once and you just lost a handle on it, right? The one thing I found interesting, so there were 4 punts total in this game, and obviously these were 2 of them. The 2 punts that were caught cleanly were kind of punted pretty traditional, with the ball flat and just the same punts we've seen in football for 80 years, right? These 2 punts, and every team uses this to a certain extent, especially when they're trying to locate the ball, was kind of those punts where they drop the nose of the football down to their foot to get that backspin. And I only found it interesting that on the 2 traditional punts, they caught them clean. And when they dropped the nose of the football, I don't know if you can slow that down right at kind of the kick point there. is they went with the nose drop punt, and Texas muffed both of them. Now, I went back last year through Texas's tape a little bit and didn't see that they had any issues with this. I don't know if it just comes off this Baylor punter's foot funny, or if it just knuckled on him, or it was something in the Waco sky, or what. But both of these punts, as opposed to the two that were cleanly caught, were these nose drop punts that teams, again, often use when they're trying to pin teams inside the 20. But it seems a little strange to me. Now, it's two different players, and maybe they just both saw the same thing on each of theirs. I found it funny that the change in the style of punt ended up being a muff. Excuse me. It might just be coincidence. Maybe they'll come out. Maybe I don't know. I don't know if Kansas might come out and go, hey, let's just nose drop it and see if they muff them. Maybe not. Any little advantage, especially Kansas going into Austin this week, is going to be big. But that was the only thing I found funny as far as the operation or anything, any fundamental breakdowns on Texas side. I didn't really see much wrong with the process. It just that was the one coincidence I found, is that the two regular punts were caught just fine, and the two with the nose drop kind of backspin, a lot of times used for the coffin corner kind of punt nowadays, really got to them, and it was interesting. Luckily, they were up. Usually, if you muff two punts in a game, you got major issues. Lucky enough, they're just obviously that much better than Baylor that they were up that much, when both of those happened, but still not things you want to see happen. Those are errors against really good teams that are going to cost you.
Yeah, definitely got to be practicing that during special teams practice this week. Does kind of wonder if it's not just Texas got away with a couple of mistakes in a game that it didn't hurt them, and it probably won't come back again. But we'll certainly see if Kansas, Oklahoma, or anybody else on Texas' schedule could take advantage of that. Dalton, man, I really appreciate you joining us today. I thought it was incredibly insightful. A lot of great data and information to provide us. I'm gonna be emailing you a lot with like, hey, can you send me some more stats? Because I love the punting debate. We're gonna talk about it all season long. I think it's an interesting race. We're gonna have a punting race. We can talk about the quarterback race. Who's the best wide receiver? Who's the best defensive player? No. We're gonna have the special teams player of the year is going to be whoever the best punter in the Big 12 is, and I'm excited to follow along with that all season, man. So again, really appreciate you joining us today. Where can everybody check out the work that you do covering college football?
Honestly, pff.com, our premium stats. You can subscribe. You can subscribe monthly or annually to PFF Premium Stats. You get access to just about everything we talked about. Anything, any of the punt grades, hang time, missed tackles. I have the whole punting leaderboard right in front of me, right here. To be honest with you, it's all on there. It's all in our premium stats. All you got to do, a monthly or an annual subscription is the easiest way to get it. And you have access to all of it on top of all other great stuff, offense, defense. You get it for NFL, NCAA. You get a ton of, if you're a fantasy football player, you get a ton of fantasy football stuff. We just, this year was the first year of our fantasy football mock draft simulator. People have loved that so far. So if you're a fantasy freak, there's nowhere better to go. We have betting advice if you're one of those. If you're better, we have it all on there. So it's all just pff.com. Premium stats, it's or PFF. I think it's PFF Plus now. They call it. They just changed it recently. PFF Plus is the subscription now. So yeah, just go on the site and take a look at it. And it's all in there.
I am a annual subscriber. It's worth the money. Love the premium stats, man. Dalton, keep up the great work, and we will absolutely have you back on again, sir.
I appreciate it, Phil. Any day talking ball is a good day, man.